discussion. You know, we are discussing here Latin America. It's not often that we discuss a whole continent, but just you know, to compare it somewhat to Africa, which is, you know, more of my experience. You know, we're talking about 20 substantial countries in Latin America, as opposed to 54 fragments of countries in Africa, of a population of 652 million people, of which the vast majority are the working class and a declining peasantry. We've seen tides of revolution and counter-revolution from imperialism onwards, and a working class struggling to take power and possibly take power in a number of occasions. So we've seen a national bourgeoisie which fought the Spanish or the Portuguese and then later the Americans in some way or other. But if you look at some of the histories of Bolivar, which I've seen now on Netflix, a very grim and difficult period in which the national bourgeois, which was trying to fight to take over a country, had to consider whether to free slaves or not, and to bring them into the armies, or maybe not, whether to include black people in the armies or not. All kinds of fragmentation in the national bourgeois, and an uncompleted bourgeois revolution in most of the countries, so that it veers between forms of democracy and then forms of dictatorship, and some of the most brutal dictatorships we've seen in the world. We just consider this in Chile in 1973, just as we were celebrating the strike wave. At the end of 73, shop stewards, workers' leaders, and so forth were taken to the soccer stadiums and shot dead. Even in South Africa, we didn't have such single-minded brutality against the working class. So we've seen what has been described in a developmental theory as a lumpen bourgeoisie, a bourgeoisie which is never really able to complete the bourgeois revolution, and so veers between one form of dictatorship or forms of democracy. But more recently in Chile, in Bolivia, in El Salvador, in Argentina and Brazil, we've seen firstly a profound economic crisis in many of these countries, but also a surge to the left, which is of great interest to us. So we're very much looking forward to what FABIO BOSCO, who represents the United Socialist Workers' Party, and he will explain a little more about himself as he speaks. We really are looking forward to your contribution and to having a very animated debate. Over to you, Fabio. You've asked for 20 minutes. I think we could be a little more indulgent in that, because we all need to listen and learn, but please go ahead. I'll give you an indication maybe after 15 minutes and then 20 minutes, just to show, so you realize how time is moving. Over to you, Fabio. Be sure to unmute.
We can't hear you, Fabio.
Can't hear you.
Yeah. Fabio, just check. I can't quite see from my indication if you're still muted.
Yeah, he's not muted. He might need to leave the meeting and rejoin.
Oh dear.
Unfortunately, that's the only solution I know of.
Okay. Fabio, did you hear that? Maybe click again. I'm afraid you might have to leave. In other words, click yourself out of the meeting and then click in
leave
again.
and rejoin. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
So sorry. Okay.
Wait.
Yeah, but anyway.
No, we could hear him before.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we are, yes.
That's okay?
Oh, fine. 100%.
So first I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be here with you to talk about Latin America. For the revolutionaries, Latin America is really very important area in the world. And so, David, Roger, and all comrades, I'm very happy to be here with you. When I was a senior high school, PSTU, and also in the Labor and People's Federation, CSP-Conlutas. So I want to work on this meeting as an exchange of experience, okay? So I tell you some things, and then I want to hear from you, your opinions, and so we can have a political discussion. First, what I think in terms of the left wing, what happened in the last years in Latin America was some uprisings and very important struggles that it's important for us to pay attention and analyze and learn from them. The main one, for sure, has been the uprising in Chile. This uprising started in October 2019. It started for a struggle against the increase in the fare of the subway in Santiago, but then it became a huge movement, And this movement put together demands of different sections that have been previously fighting back the regime, the students for public education, the working class for better wages and against casualization. There was a very important struggle as well against the private pension system that's called AFP, women rights struggles, the struggle of the native Chilean people, the Mapuches. So this movement put together all these struggles that have been happening before and become one powerful, very powerful struggle, where with three main characteristics. The first one was a massive participation of working class people and poor people, and even sections of the middle class. So we could see some days that was demonstrations of millions. What for Chile was something that we have never seen before. So this massive movement that was not all the time because it has ups and downs, but it was one of the main features. The other one that's very interesting is that it emerged the necessity of self-defense because the Chilean police, the Carabineros, they are very, very violent. And so in this movement, activists organized what they call the first row. In Spanish is primera línea, which is the people that carried out self-defense against the police forces. And maybe, who are these people? These people were the vanguard of this uprising, you see, of this revolution. And there was something like 30,000 people engaged in self-defense in the first row. So it was very, very important development in this revolution. And the other one was that this unity of between different sectors that were fighting for specific demands were united in a struggle that was going against the economic policies of the regime and against the regime itself. So what unified everyone was the struggle to put down the president of Chile. His name is Piñera. And they struggle for a constituent assembly. So these three are the main features of this very important revolution. And what we see now, the revolution is not completed, you see. They managed to achieve a kind of constituent assembly with limitations that, if you want, I can explain to you later. That was an achievement for the working class. And now they have recently elected a new government, which is a bourgeois government. But it was, this election was a result of this huge mobilization. And then we will talk, later I'll talk a bit more about this government in Chile. This process in Chile was not the only one in Latin America. The second most important one was in Colombia. In Colombia, there was some things different. It was not so powerful as in Chile, but it have something different for Colombia, which is the guerrilla organizations. They used it to lead everything in Colombia for the last 30 or 40 years, you see. But now this uprising, or this social explosion, as they call it there, it did not have the organizations that are linked to the guerrilla groups taking the lead, you see. It was a kind of spontaneous uprising. So it's something different for Colombia. And the second issue is that there was, it was combined with strikes, workers' strikes. It started with a general strike, what they call paro nacional. So it had this working class content as well, larger than Chile, but as a whole, the movement was not as strong as the one in Chile. Even so, for Colombia, it was spectacular. There was uprising also in Ecuador, but I would like just to mention one more, which is in Mexico. There was a very important strike of industrial workers on the border of the United States, in the city of Matamoros. Matamoros, it's a working class city, something like 100,000 industrial workers. These cities on the border, they are essentially working for American corporations, you see. But as the cost of labor in Mexico is much lower than in America, so there is a large industrial areas in all cities on the border. And so you see, it's a very working class city. And there was a strike. They created a new union. They also launch candidates for the election. It was a very interesting experience as well. And recently, in another city called Silao, the General Motors workers, they created and endorsed a new union that is a split from the very conservative bureaucracy of Mexican labor movement, which they call charros. So this, I wanted to mention Mexico because it's interesting. Many people, many intellectuals, left-wing intellectuals, believe that the industrial working class is withering away, you see. But in Mexico, that's not the reality. And this is, I think it's very important for us as revolutionaries, as Marxists, to follow and to understand. Now, I want to talk about the three main challenges I see in Latin America for revolutionaries. The first one is a struggle against a kind of recolonization of Latin America. You see, all Latin American countries, they are semi-colonies of mainly the US imperialism, but also of the European imperialism and a bit of Japanese imperialism, and also China that's coming strongly to the area as well. So this poses very important challenges for the working class, you see. I can tell you we need some kind of new national liberation, you see, against imperialism and this presence of the corporations that take the best of the wealth of all these countries out of them. This struggle is combined with the struggle against the traditional national bourgeoisie, which are connected with these imperialist interests. So this is the first main task. Sometimes these bourgeoisie, they are resorting to dictatorships or trying to build one, like in Brazil. Bolsonaro would like to have a dictatorship in Brazil, but he's not managing to at this point. Or they go through a liberal bourgeois democracy with more or less repression and civil liberties. But even so, as a whole, without this struggle to stop this recolonization of Latin America, the perspectives is that for the working class here, things will remain very difficult and worsening. The second biggest challenge, I think, is to overcome the Castroist, the Chavist, and these new reformist political formations that they call themselves anti-capitalist parties. You see, they are very much immersed in... I'm sorry? Did you talk to me, Aman?
No, sorry, it's just, I hit the mic by mistake, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, in attempting to mute a man, I muted Fabio. Fabio, could you unmute?
Fabio, you become muted.
Sorry, it's my fault. Interfering.
Okay.
Right.
Now it's okay? Yes, okay. So I was talking about the second challenge, which is to overcome the old and new reformist leaderships that the working class and the social movements have here in Latin America, which are pretty much influenced by the Castroist policies. They were very influenced by Chavez, but now Venezuela is not so influential as it used to be before. And also there are new formations, like this, the guy that has just been elected the president of Chile, Gabriel Boric. It's this reformist anti-capitalist parties. You see, his organization is called Frente Amplio, broad front, more or less. And it's a petty bourgeois organization that works together with the Communist Party, which in Chile today is also comes from this extract of the population, a petty bourgeois sector of the population. And they are in alliance with the bourgeoisie. You see, the Chilean government, the new Chilean government, which will start soon, it will be a bourgeois government. Despite of the fact the majority of the ministers are women, the Minister for Economy is a guy that worked in the World Bank. He was connected with the previous government of what they call Concertación, which is the Socialist Party and the Christian Democracy Party. They were together in this formation. This guy were with them and they ruled Chile 3 times since the end of the dictatorship. This is a second challenge, which will be a very important challenge. About Cuba, I would like to hear from you as well, you see, because for us in Latin America, Cuba is a very important symbol. So it's not easy to deal with it. You see, in Cuba, there was the 1959 revolution. The private property was nationalized, and but there has never been workers' democracy. You see, the power remained in the leadership of the guerrilla organization, the movement led by Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and others. But the fact that there was a nationalization of the economy bring a lot of achievements for the working class, you see. So the improvements in education and healthcare are world famous. But all these achievements, what happened? Cuba remained isolated, you see, and the policies coming from Castro leadership. In the beginning, Che Guevara made some efforts, let's say, to export the revolution. But this finished with him, and Fidel Castro worked to not to export the revolution. And maybe one of the best symbols is his policies towards El Salvador and Nicaragua, where he said in Nicaragua that Nicaragua should not be a new Cuba. So it should work to keep the capitalism there. So in the end, what happens that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the isolation of Cuba increased a lot, and there was a very big economic crisis they call special period. It was from 1991 till 1994, if I'm not wrong. And the solution that the Cuban leaders, was to open the economy for European capitalists, you see. And so European corporations, Spanish, French, Italian, they took over the tourist industry, which is the most profitable that there is in Cuba today, but also, you see, the concession of the airport, the production of cigar, of rum. So these European corporations today, together with a company that belongs to the Cuban army, they control the majority of the Cuban economy. So Cuba is becoming a kind of semi-colonial country, but subjected to European imperialism, not American imperialism, because America is still playing the blockage cards, you see. So, so what happens? All the achievements of the revolution are going down. They are getting worse. And and I can tell you today, Cuba is pretty much like other countries in Latin America. You see, part of the population are in poverty. There are still jobs for everyone, but the access to food, to medicine, everything is becoming much more difficult. And these are the reasons for this day of protest that happened last year in July 11th. It was something very, very impressive. This protest happened in something like 50 cities in Cuba. They did not have a leadership. You see, it was a kind of explosion. They were protesting against the inflation of food, because in the beginning of last year, the government made a reform that increased a lot the prices of everything. And the price of medicine, there was a collapse in the hospital in Matanzas that they could not meet the demands to provide healthcare services for the COVID patients. And there is a problem of electricity. You see, the regular provision of electricity. So these reasons are behind these protests, you see, and immediately the protests mixed with the demand for freedom. So there was this social content together with this democratic content in this day of protests in Cuba. The response of the Cuban leadership was to stop the movement with repression. And there is something dreadful that's happening there, which is the criminalization of the people that took part in these protests. The Cuban government announced that they are prosecuting 790 people for taking part in these protests that were largely peaceful protests. And people are getting sentences of 8 years in jail, 10, 12, 15. There are some minors. And the majority of these people, they are Black people, they are poor people, you see. So in Cuba, I think it would be important for us to discuss, and I think we need to take in our hands an international campaign to demand freedom for all these political prisoners, you see, of the July 11 protests. What else?
Fabio, I'm not putting a break, but I am mentioning you've had about just short of 30 minutes. Okay. But please continue. Yeah.
Okay, I just mentioned the third main challenge I see for the revolutionaries in Latin America, which is the question of rebuilding the Fourth International. You see, there are two experiences here that were up to now well succeeded, but even they have limits. They pose new challenges for revolutionaries here, you see. One of them is in Argentina. In Argentina, the Trotskyist organizations, they are standing in the election together in a front that's called Unified Workers Left Front. It's more or less this is translation. In Spanish, it's FITU. And it has been in the last years a very good experience. In the last elections, for you to have an idea, the FITU, they managed to be the third national force. You see, they got something around nearly 6% of the votes. It's 1,300,000 votes. So it's a very interesting process. And they appear as so openly as socialists. I think it's something very positive. But then we must see the limits, you see, because what happened when you have this good experience regarding parliamentary elections, we must keep in mind that parliament is a bourgeois institution, you see. It's a bourgeois institution to keep capitalism, and it's not to overthrow it. And what happened? Revolutionaries must be careful not to adapt themselves to electoralist policies. You see, so this is a big challenge. And what I see in Argentina is that the two main organizations that leads this front, neither of them, they have some things to counterweight these pressures that comes from the Argentinian policies and the parliament, which is a strong presence in the working class, to have an international organization that could counterweight these pressures coming from parliament. So I think there are important challenges there, but up to now things are going well. So it's a very interesting experience, And what I see in other countries, the majority of the revolutionary and Trotskyist organizations, they are still putting their cards in anti-capitalist formations, you see, reformist formations. So in Argentina, there is something positive, which is the Trotskyists are together, revolutionaries are together, standing in the elections. The other experience that I think it's interesting is the experience here in Brazil, which is the presence of revolutionaries in the labor movement. You see, this Labor and People's Federation, which I am part of, CSP-Conlutas, is an important labor federation. It's much smaller than the larger ones. You see, the largest one here in Brazil is the CUT, which is led by the Workers' Party. CSP-Conlutas is something like 10% of the CUT. So we are much smaller, but it's a very militant organization. It puts together different groups inside. It has an internal democracy, and it has a militant perspective towards the working class. And it also started as a labor and people's federation. And why? 8% of the force of CSP-Conlutas is labor, you see, and 20% is mainly social movements, of landless movement and homeless movements. But in order to build for, to have an orientation towards workers' power, we need to unite these movements, you see, labor movement, social movements, movements against oppression of women, of LGBT people, Black people. So our perspective is to work to put together all these movements. And so this experience is very interesting, but it also places challenges for the revolutionaries, because the trade unions, you know, they are working class institutions, but they are conservative institutions, you see, and they put pressure on the revolutionaries. Pressures for revolutionaries not talk about revolution, for revolutionaries just to be militant for the immediate demands of the working class. And so it's necessary to have this counterweight to fight back these pressures coming from the trade unions. And sometimes we manage to fight back this pressure, sometimes we don't. So I think in Brazil, it's a big issue for the revolutionaries to deal with. I think I said the main issues I'd like to talk to you. Now I would like to hear from you, not only about this, but any other issues you want to raise. I'm open here to talk to you. Okay, so thank you for your attention. Now I will listen to you.
Well, Fabio, can I say that was a truly marvelous contribution. And, you know, we could let you go on for quite a lot longer, mainly because we want to hear, you know, there's been so much struggle and so many movements and so many achievements and so many disappointments. So we've, you know, we've got all of that in our mind. And I know that some of our comrades would like to come in. Please, when you come in, please indicate by going down to the section at the bottom of your screen, which says reactions, and clicking there when it says raise hand, rather than thumbs up. Just put a raise hand so we know who we're dealing with. And we look forward to quite a few contributions. Sometime in the discussion, I'd like to pass the chair to Roger to make some of my own, but I'm also listening too. Could I recognize Carol? Could I see anybody else who's coming in after Carol? Anyway, the floor is open to you, Carol.
Fabio, that was wonderful. It was fabulous. And I really appreciate it, and I know everybody else on the call does too. And the thing for me, coming from the United States, is, I mean, you can get leftists to agree that the capitalists are bad and the militarists are bad. Really, the problem is Castroism and Chavism here, because you can't say anything about how these leaders and how what they're trying to bring into, to bring into office essentially is to support the capitalists. And so whenever I'm in a group in my union called the International Committee, and they're all Stalinists, and anybody who says anything about Cuba, well, the American, you come from a deficit when you come from the United States, because the United States is bad, right? And the United States has treated Cuba in the most horrendous way possible, and with the blockade. And so, my committee passed a resolution that we got to the union opposing the blockade. But anything more than that, you're not allowed to say that, Cuba is all the things that you described. So when people were saying, there were some people on my committee who were saying, well, look at what they're doing to the protesters in July 11th. Well, that's all America. America has sent in CIA provocateurs. Those aren't real Cubans. And it just goes on and on and on interminably. And because most of the people who are in the left are not Marxists in the United States, they're all sort of third worldist. And so, everything is about fighting American imperialism. What's wrong with you? You don't want to fight American imperialism, as opposed to really looking concretely about what these leaderships are doing and why ultimately. When I was in Chile in 1971, I remember that the Cuban ambassador coming to visit Allende, and in all the newspapers it said, we're not trying to export our revolution to Chile and to Latin America. So no matter what you say, even if they have said it themselves, it's almost impossible to get people to think, because they're so guilt-ridden for being American, North Americans, I should say, as opposed to Americans or North Americans, and Stalinism permeates everything here. Even if people don't think they're Stalinists, they really are. And so ultimately, to try to get out this information that you're giving, which I'm going to look at the recording when it gets up on the YouTube channel, but it's really so difficult to talk to leftists in the United States about these issues, because of course America is attacking everybody who wants to have any sort of liberation whatsoever. So the more evidence about who these people are, hopefully the easier it'll be to get into conversations with people who think that that these people are bringing in some sort of socialism. Venezuela with their own socialist characteristics, but it's a humongous problem in the United States. So I appreciate your having all of that information. That's it.
Thanks so much, Carol. Look, I'd like to recognize Seamus next, and then Steve. And then after Steve, Roger, if you take the chair for a while, I'd like to make a few points. Seamus?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Fabio, for a very clear and enlightening description of what's going on in Latin America. I'm not going to go into the details, but it comes out, as far as I see it, that the main issue there is a question of what do revolutionaries do in real situations. And this is the discussion that it was never resolved. And we always have problems in approaching these matters. And it's easy to criticize tactics, it's easy to criticize people, and it's easy to see a situation as a static, a situation that has has to accept one and only correct way forward. What I see in what you described is this dynamic change of situations from one moment to the next, from one alliance to the next, from discussing with people, criticizing and going forward. And I think this is where we usually fail. We fail because we are being dogmatic. We fail because we are approaching situations as if they are not changing. Well, what you described is so dynamic; it changes from moment to moment. And what you described as the power of the huge movements which manage alliances across the board to bring results and to fight parliamentary elections, but at the same time, we should not lose track that parliamentary action is bourgeois action, and it's only a step towards what we are aiming at. So I believe that what I would keep out of your description is that yes, we take part in these fights. Yes, we fight as best as we can. Yes, we make compromises in our program and in our alliances, and we might even work with people that we shall clash in the future. But through all this, we have to have ourselves very clear in our analysis what is going on, where we are heading, what we are after. We don't have to put it in the forefront of our programs. We don't have to insist and quarrel with allies because of that. But we should know where we are going to. In fact, I'm not saying something new. That's the Bolshevik experience in Russia. They never had a sectarian approach. They never had a static approach. They were developing their tactics and their programs as the situation was developing. And this is what we should be doing. The second thing I want to mention is that we should not lose sight of the international issues happening around us. I mean, it would be wrong to translate this fight against imperialism into something that takes us back to an era of colonial struggles. It's a different situation. We have to see this as a struggle developing in the sense of a struggle on a world scale and world revolution. And we should know that our national struggles are part of that. And only as part of that can they potentially succeed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Seamus. Steve, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think this discussion is important because obviously the question of Latin America, the experiences of the Latin American, Central American working class is critical to the world revolution. And there is obviously a tremendous history of struggle, of class struggle and revolutionary struggle in Latin America. So what are the lessons of that? And I think that, you know, at first for revolutionaries is the independence of the working class, that the working class has to have its own independent working class formations. That is a critical principle for the working class movement. And I think Conlutas, in my view, is an organization that has that formation or that perspective as an independent working class organization, not just of unions, but social movements, women, Black, indigenous people. It's a class, it's a working class formation of independence. And I think that's why the experience of Conlutas is important internationally in other countries. And certainly it'd be an advance in the United States to have a formation like that. The second thing is the question of the United Front, because the struggle of Trotsky for United Front and the lessons and the transitional program, the method of the United Front is critical globally at this point. We have to unite the working class on class struggle issues, on workers' struggles, the Clover miners, the Namibian miners, different struggles that are going on all over the world, housing, education. And we have to build an international united front on class struggle issues that ties together the working class and political organizations who have differences with each other. And let's be clear, there are a lot of differences. And my view, many of them are sectarian in those who call themselves Trotskyists, that these differences prevent them from organizing international united fronts. And one of the clearest developments of that is the Clover struggle, where Socialist Alternative, a Trotskyist international grouping, is not organizing a united front for the Clover miners around the world. We had a demonstration in the United States. They were MIA, their members, and they've dissolved themselves, or they've gone into, not dissolved, to the DSA, and and that's where they're at, and they're not fighting in the DSA for, in my view, a labor party. So I think what we can do is we can build united fronts and work with groups, organizations, and unions globally to support each other and to fight also sectarianism, because the crisis that we're in, the rise of fascism in the United States, the climate crisis, the dangers that the working class faces on a global level require a united front perspective to organize the working class. That is the only way that we're going to be able to advance the struggle in the working class. The other thing is building an international working class movement. How do you do that? Well, in my view and our view, the United Front Committee for the Labor Party, you unite around working class issues, class struggles, and then you tie workers together in the actual concrete struggles that are going on. That's how you build an international working class movement. In other words, it's not an abstraction, it's a concretization of the fight against global capitalism in actual concrete struggles. And the authority of revolutionary organization is not by proclamations, but by actual struggles and victories against the capitalist class. If we were able to beat the capitalist class in Argentina and take forward the struggle, that will give you authority in the working class. So the last thing is global capitalism now, because the danger of war, imperialist war, is a great threat. I mean, the United States, as we all know, is a dangerous, adventurous, criminal operation. And the threats against Ukraine and the mobilization, trying to mobilize the European imperialists together with the United States against Russia and against China, is a very great danger to the world working class. So this question of imperialism is a critical one for the working class. Of course, I think we're all for the abolishment of the military, the US military and capitalist militaries in every country, against military agreements, NATO, all these agreements. At the same time, we're for the independence of the working class. We don't support Putin. Putin crushes the working class. Putin attacks the working class. He doesn't want any working class movement in Belarus or other countries, So we have to be clear that these bureaucrats, ex-Stalinists, are anti-working class. We don't support them against the working class and against the independence of the working class. That's critical. And the question of Cuba, my position has always been, you can't make a revolution in one country. The amazing thing about Cuba is it's been able to survive, faced with this colossal imperialist country, the United States, which surrounds it every day. So we have to fight against US imperialist blockade of Cuba, at the same time for the independence of the Cuban working class. There is no democratic debate and discussion in Cuba in the working class. That is not socialism. It's not socialist democracy. But we have to do that in the context of a fight, particularly in the United States, against the attempt to destroy Cuba and reinstitute capitalism. And I agree that the capitalism is coming to Cuba. I've been there, times. The airports, the infrastructure are built by capitalists. The Chinese model, and this is the last thing I want to end with, that there's a road to socialism through capitalism, is what it is complete fake. I mean, it's a revision of Marxism. There is no road to socialism or socialist revolution through capitalism. And China is integrated into the world capital system. It's part of the WTO. It's working with the capitalists to export capital and to crush the working class, which is what they're doing in Namibia and other countries where they have operations. Piraeus in Greece, where they're trying to crush the dock workers, and you have state-owned companies. So we need to fight against Stalinism, and we need to fight for the independence of the working class against the attack both by the capitalists and by Stalinist bureaucrats.
Thanks so much, Steve. Now, could I pass the chair over to Roger for, if he can time me at between 5 and 7 minutes, so I could make, some points. First of all, if I could say in relation to Cuba, the question of racism in Cuba is by no means overcome. Let me give you examples from when I visited there. I visited Cuba with a black girlfriend. And when we went into the hotel and were about to get into the lift, she was assaulted by about 3 security people as she was entering into the lift. And she hit them so hard, it was quite an embarrassment to them as she swore at them in English. And then they realized that actually she wasn't a black Cuban. They thought because she was black, she must be a black Cuban. In other words, any black person entering that hotel was a suspect to be assaulted and be grabbed. Please, we must know this. It's not, there's no utopia there. In fact, it's far from utopia. But it has made a stand against imperialism, and for that we salute it. But it's a very complex relationship when it comes to handling race. When I was participating in an academic conference, and the people who were most, I criticized the fact that in Africa, anywhere you go, you could get bananas on the streets. And I love bananas. But in Cuba, you couldn't get a banana because it all had to go through a state something or other, corporation or something else. And I said that was a scandal. In other words, ordinary poor black women were not allowed to go to the street and sell. I said that's ridiculous. And I was almost assaulted by young black sociologists who absolutely defended the new period and said it was a way towards socialism. You won't believe the level of confusion and the level of racism too, because what happened was they were promoting these young black people because they were orthodox Stalinists against some of the older white sociologists. They're playing racial games all the time. And it was quite, quite something to see. When I visited a Cuban family, there were no stairs at all inside the house. It was a 3-story building. You had to walk a plank. It was about 18 inches wide, and you had to climb up that plank to get there. There were no internal stairs, right? I mean, the people are living in abject poverty. The kids outside were doing what we do in Africa, which is to catch rats and cook them and eat them. Now, that normally is not what people do in urban areas. I've seen it done because I've done it myself with black kids in rural areas in South Africa. But kids catching rats to eat was what was going on there. Water was supplied to the house once a week in a big barrel, oil barrel. If you know oil barrels, you know what they're like. And that was filled up once a week for all the families that lived in that house. There was no continuous supply. Now, apparently with water has been now piped to the people through a concession which is offered to a Spanish company, not through the reorganization of municipal government to be able to do it themselves. Amazing. So you have this advanced socialism in a sense that there was I could say the schools were outstanding. The maths, when I would chat to kids, it was very good, but people were living in abject poverty. But they still praised Che because he was an internationalist, and very little praise for Castro. And the poor black people were totally excluded from the tourist industry. I stayed in a hotel on the beach, and I have to laugh. The one time there was a black person was, guess what? when it came to organizing dancing and music. I mean, that is a typification of where a black person comes in, not in the management, but in organizing entertainment. Well, he did a great job, I'm not complaining, but it does show you where black and white fitted together. It was, it was quite a shame. You had to recognize that the people were marvelous. I would advise anyone who wants to have a trip, you will love it. But keep your eyes open, because what I'm telling you is the reality. Now, I just want to go on to some points. I hope I'm not going on too long. When we look at imperialism in Latin America, we're looking at the rule of the dollar as much as the gun. Cuba is a dollar economy. Venezuela is a dollar economy. One by one, you can go through the various smaller countries of Latin America, and maybe even Argentina too, in the end, is that Cuba, you cannot buy anything if you are if you visit without using a dollar. You have to change it into the local currency. In the past, nowadays, absolute rule by the dollar. And that's happening in Zimbabwe and in other African countries too, where there's been an economic collapse. It's the only basis in which you can avoid runaway inflation. And we're seeing runaway inflation developing in Latin America, and we'll see this dollarization extending even further. So we've got to theorize. It's not just a matter of being left-wing and good organizers and fighting the fight. We have to have theory. We have to develop and move beyond what is called academically, and sometimes it's embedded into the different anti-capitalist parties, of dependency theory. I won't go into all aspects. Look at it up on Wikipedia or whatever else. It was based in Latin America. In other words, the struggle for national liberation, for the freeing of economies from the grip of imperialism, developed in Latin America. It was left-wingers rather than Marxists, who developed that idea, but it's still the dominant idea, I think. It's not the permanent revolution. Now, we can't just shout permanent revolution against these people. We have to illustrate what it means. It means that the working class is attached to one type or other of the bourgeois, but the bourgeois cannot develop the nation. Then bourgeois operating in an international current where they're refusing to integrate the national states because they don't believe in national, they don't believe in the Bolivarian revolution. That comes out of their mouth, but it's the same thing as in Africa. We have Pan-Africanism, but you hate the other black person who's come to take your job. That's what you say. So there are even wars and wars between countries and within countries against the poorest layers who have actually moved from one country to a country. In particular, in South Africa, we are paralyzed by xenophobia, hatred of blacks for blacks. It's not a racist thing. Well, it is convoluted racism, but there it is. Now we have to illustrate our perspective for the transformation of our countries and of the economy fundamentally through collaboration across boundaries, through the unification of Argentina and Chile and Brazil. Imagine that power, so that you can deal in confidence with these absolutely capitalist-based corporates from anywhere in the world, from China too. And then we can actually start talking about, you have to have an internal market. Even if you had a socialist transformation, the beginnings of a socialist transformation, you have to develop industry which can have lower unit costs. You can't have lower unit costs little by little in each country. You have to work this so that you can actually carry out rigorous nationalization, but not nationalization country by country, but nationalization so that Chile could lead in one sector, Argentina and others, Brazil maybe in software. I'm absolutely appalled that we have to bow and scrape towards Microsoft. Brazil had made a lead, and I tried to do this in South Africa when I was a director of our public sector research company, to abolish Microsoft and to take on Brazilian software. I failed completely because we're too colonized to break away and to collaborate in an open software, and other ways in which we can absolutely solidify one country, instead of fighting in one country alone, to be able to maximize the product, well, let's say to the benefit not on a capitalist basis, but on a cooperative socialist basis, so that nationalization isn't national limitedness. It's expanding the base of the working class throughout the area. Then we'll see real development and a breakaway and a balancing in the beginning, and then a breakaway if it's possible. I mean, the lunatics of dependency theory think you can completely break away, like in maybe return to the land in Bolivia or something of that kind. But we can't do that. We must talk the other language of integrating countries through socialist revolution and then forming federations of whatever kind we can until we have a united socialist federation of Latin America and the world. I mean, it sounds crazy, but actually that is what needs to be done. And we can even prove it economically. It's impossible for any one of those countries to fight against world markets at the moment. It's a fantasy. And so you end up with Brazil providing all the agricultural products for China and sometimes for America too, and being integrated into unequal exchange, which can never benefit the workers and can never build up. We'll never see a national bourgeoisie developing in these countries. Not now, it's too late. It's far too late. And so we're going to have to have
about 10 minutes. Okay.
Okay. Thanks for the trap smack on the wrist. Okay. But anyway, let's take that forward. I'll just one last point if I could. I'm absolutely so enthusiastic to take up a point by Steve. MST, the Landless People's Movement. Now, is that part, it's a question, is that part of your group? Because I'm very keen that we do make contact with MST for this reason. In South Africa, the shack dwellers are murdered, are oppressed in every possible way by the radical bourgeoisie. They send the police in there and they beat them up and they kill the leaders. And we support Abashlali, that's the name of the group, ABM, Abashlali Group, to be able to have land and to be able to build houses in the cities where the bourgeoisie or national black bourgeoisie in South Africa is totally neglecting and oppressing them. And Abashlali in Durban, where I come from, sings the International. Where did they learn it? From the MST. Now, I hope that the MST is not just part of the reformist current or whatever there is there, but I hope that we can have direct links. Workers speaking to workers, shack dwellers speaking to shack dwellers, people on the land speaking to each other. I look forward to that. Thank you so much.
David, your chair again.
Apologies, I'm looking for hands. All I can see is Steve, unless he wants to come back again. Other comrades like to come in? Aman, please come in.
Hi there, thanks. Just a couple of quick remarks. First of all, thank you, Fabio. I enjoyed it actually, listening and getting all the info. A couple of points that I have. One is, I agree with you with regard to the issue that is actually taking place in Latin America. But my problem is that the problem I think that many of us has faced, at least many of us I think, who have been of my age, who remember the time of the pre-Putin and pre-1980s. There, most of the countries in the world, I think, had the issue with regard to what was known at the time of Soviet Union. And if you had gone to many people and said, our problem is the Soviet Union, that is our problem. I understand it from that point of view as a problem. The question is now, I think, at this day and age, in 21st century especially, the working class, I think to a large extent, across many countries of the world, has moved far beyond that. I'm not saying there is not a problem. What I'm saying, the scale of it seems to be different to what it was then, and I think even today, the scale is very different. If we were looking at it from the point of view of what needs to be done in terms of the working class in Latin America, the questions are literally, one part of it obviously is the imperialism, One part of it is the variety, I think, of thoughts, ideas, movements that want something different, national bourgeoisie, etc. But at the same time, I think we have seen around the world a huge growth in what I tend to call what Marx used to call communism, the worker communism, the communism which is known and actually bred and born within the working class. In Latin America, the question is, what is the points that they have to do? What is it that needs to be done? I think that is probably one of the questions on many people's mind. And the question of that would mean, how would the working class overcome effectively its own bourgeoisie? I understand that the whole issue needs to be broader and not within one country, but at the same time, every one of us, according at least to the Communist Manifesto, still have the duty to overcome our own national bourgeoisie. I mean bourgeoisie within our countries. So the question that I had, I got a lot of information from what FABIO was saying, but I think the question is, what should be done about the working class, and what is in the hands, or what is the task that working class has got in terms of those who want to make a change within, let's say, for example, Brazil or Argentina, etc. The other parts, as what happens around the world, I think that is in the hands of everyone around the world. But we have to actually put our own house in order in every country, I think. So the question that I had is, what are the ways forward? What needs to be done? And if you look at it from the point of view of what needs to be done, one of the issues would be that of the other bourgeois, Castro and everybody else included. But there are many, many issues within, I think, Brazil. There are many issues within Argentina, and there are Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and many others. How or what would be the way forward? I'm asking you because you're there, literally. What are the tasks at hand? Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Look, I'm looking at the number of questions that are being raised. I hope, Fabio, you're making notes. I'm sure you are. So that you could come back on quite a few points of information and other points. Let's have further discussion. Susan, would you like to come in?
Actually, what I was going to say is, my question is on COVID and how it's changed, which I think is totally left field of yours. So I'd probably rather listen to Fabio talk about the socialism, and then maybe look at where people are going on the new normal post-COVID, because it seems to me that the world is splitting very much between countries moving more right, stopping protests, in order to prevent us from changing, because it's quite clear that we haven't dealt with COVID very well. Whereas there are other countries, and China is one of them, and New Zealand and Taiwan, where they've used much more socialist principles and dealt with it much better. And that is actually showing up that corporate capitalism is not the answer. Okay, so can I step back a bit, but can I flag that up as something to think about?
Yeah, surely, Suzanne. Could we have other indications? Sorry for my abbreviations in an exchange. I was just making a point in the chat that MERG was the macroeconomic reform group. Yeah. It wasn't actually a reform, but let's call it the reform group, which had a radical, well, somewhat radical policy. And Castro advised our African National Congress government not to take that route, but rather to go closer to the World Bank and to make compromise with local capitalism. I'll get the exact words that he used, and were used by the ANC bureaucracy to justify their turn towards neoliberalism. Castro was credited for that. But look, I don't want to go on too much in that way. Any other indications? Otherwise, what I would suggest is that, Fabio, if you could start thinking about points of information and other points of that type, which you'd like to come back immediately, that doesn't mean that you do not have a right to reply overall towards the end. Would you care to come in now?
Okay. Oh, wait. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Look, first, I'm very pleased with all the opinions and comments comrades have raised. I agree, I think, with either 90% or 95% with all of them. I was pleased to listen from Carol that yes, we have a big problem with Castroists here in Brazil. You see, to make this campaign in solidarity with the political prisoners in Cuba, it's hell, because almost all the left-wing groups, they are completely supportive of Cuban regime. It's not Cuba, Cuban regime. So it's very difficult task. So it's not only a problem of in the US, maybe in US worse, but even here in Brazil, it's difficult. But I think that some things that we must raise, you see, we must raise this flag and fight for it. I had an experience in last December. There was an international meeting of subway workers. I was there and I raised this issue, you see. And then the guy from Chile that is from the Federation of Subway Workers, he's from the Communist Party. And then he started to say, look, I don't know if there is any political prisoners in Cuba. What I know is that in Chile we have political prisoners and all these things, you see. But what happened in the end was that the meeting could not take a stand, you see. Normally, we always take stands against the blockage, US blockage on Cuba, on Venezuela. This time, as there was this issue of the political prisoners, the issue of Cuba was put out of the agenda, you see. So I feel that it's very important to do it. I think, Carol, that there are new things happening in Cuba, you see. Some things are like before. Now, Cuba is undergoing a economic depression, you see. It's like the special period 30 years ago. But now, there is no Fidel Castro, you see, leadership which had much more prestige than the current leadership. So it makes things more difficult for the Cuban regime to defend itself. At the same time, what we had before was mainly anti-communist people making opposition to Cuba. But now that the movement is diverse, you see, we have been in touch with guys in Cuba that are Marxists, and they are against the Cuban regime. So that there is a space for left-wing policies, you see. So I think this is very important for us, and it's our responsibility to make it strong, you see, because these guys, when they look abroad, they just see support for the regime from the left-wing groups, you see. So we are left-wing, we are revolutionaries. We must show that there is another perspective, and this perspective goes against the Cuban regime for the rights of the people, not only to survive, but to have freedom, to have the right to decide their future. So I was very pleased to listen to you, Carol, and I think David also raised a lot of issues regarding Cuba. Yes, that's exactly it. A lot of poverty, there is racism. It's Cuba now is Latin America, you see. It was not like this 30 years ago. But now it's more and more similar to all the problems we have in Latin America. With the difference is that the imperialism which Cuba is subjected to is the European one, while almost all other countries here in Latin America, the main imperialism is the US. So that's one difference, but it is still imperialism, it is still capitalism, you see. Okay, this is about Cuba. And just to tell you, we are, our labor federation, CSP-Conlutas, we are making a campaign solidarity with them. We are making some agreements with these guys in Cuba that are left-wing and that stands in solidarity with the movement of the political prisoners. And one of the things they asked us is to publish the reports. They are writing reports on what happened in July 11. And we will translate into Portuguese, we'll publicize here in Brazil. So it's ways that we get connected with brothers and sisters there. Then, let me see. Temus talked about this issue of parliament. I agree with you. I also, I think all of us learn from Lenin politics, you see, towards parliament as, okay, we participate, but it's secondary. The direct action, the self-organization of the working class is our main goal. Parliamentary politics, okay, you can see how we use it to help the working class to self-organize and to fight for their rights. So I completely agree with you, and I think it's to criticize this parliamentary deviation is the role, our role as revolutionaries, you see. So I completely agree with what you raised, and that the issue will be to work for an international socialist revolution. We are on the same page. We are definitely on the same page. Steve, I met Steve many years ago, 10 years ago in the US, and he came to Brazil. He attended one of our CSP-Conlutas meeting. He's a very good friend. And I agree with all the issues he raised. I think this issue of Ukraine, we must raise the demand of finishing with NATO and also finishing with the one that Russia leads, that has just invaded Kazakhstan. So we must oppose all these military, reactionary alliance. And Steve, let me tell you, I also think that regarding Cuba, we must start our talking saying that we oppose the blockade, and America has no right to say anything about Cuba, you see. At the same time, we must stand for the right for the people to have basic rights, the right for peaceful protest. You see, the guys are in jail. I think we must combine both things, which are the things that we believe, you see. I agree with you, and I also believe that we must work for a united front nationally and internationally. We, CSP-Conlutas, we take part in an international labor network for solidarity and struggle with some other organizations, and we believe that it's essential to build this international working class based alliance. This does not replace the need for an international revolutionary party. You see, they are different things, but both of them are needed for us to advance the struggle of the working class. Let me see what else. David talked about Bolivarianism and make a comparison with Pan-Africanism. Yes, I agree with you totally. Yes, they are bourgeois policies that brings some illusion among the working class, but soon the working class can overcome these illusions. Because in fact, this Bolivarianism, they don't bring any benefit for the working class, and it does not bring a real independence for the country as well. So it's we must expose it. And I agree with you, we must work for a federation of socialist countries in Latin America, in Africa, in every continent, as the way to really have independence from imperialism. Aman put a very difficult question, which is what's to be done? Yes, that's not an easy question, okay? In general, what we do, what my organization do in Brazil is first to go into the working class with a priority to the industrial working class. And we stay there with the workers, fighting for the minimum demands, the economic demands, democratic demands, all of them. We organize there. Every struggle that happens, we work with, we support them, and we try to build a leadership to help these struggles to get unified with the others and to fight for workers' power, you see. And we also do a strong propaganda for socialism. That's a solution. We are working, you see. We did not manage to have a strong leadership that could fight for power, but we try to keep these principles as a way to move forward. So I don't have a full answer to your question, but I can tell you that I am optimistic, because when I see that the working class is moving, there is possibility of change, you see. So, and I feel in Latin America, despite of all the poverty and all difficulties, the working class and the poor people, they are moving. And so the possibilities of change are there, and we must be there, working there with a revolutionary policy, you see. What else? There are two issues that were raised here. One about COVID and one about the landless movement in Brazil. Susan, this issue of COVID, let me tell you, here in Brazil, it's different from what we are seeing in America and in Europe. You see, we don't have a strong anti-vax movement. Here, the majority of the people in Brazil wants to get vaccinated. And if there is a second one, a third one, and a fourth one, people want to get it. So we don't have these movements. What we have is that the president of Brazil is against vaccines. You see, he tried he brings fake news about vaccines, all kind of fake news you can imagine. But still, there is a tradition of vaccination being very effective to prevent many illness. So people here, they are on the page of having the right to get vaccinated. So we don't have what you have there. Maybe with these efforts that Bolsonaro is working, maybe it will have also this complex problem. And regarding the new normal, I think this is an illusion that the bourgeoisie is bringing to make the economy work, despite of the fact people will get contaminated and people will die. So I think it's very problematic, this idea of this new normal. I think we must stick to the demands that we must preserve all lives we can, even if we have to stop part of the economy, whatever, you see.
Yeah.
Well, that's about COVID. And about the landless movement, David, let me tell you, the landless movement was a very important movement and progressive movement before Lula da Silva was elected. I mean, when Fernando Henrique Cardoso was the president of Brazil, the landless movement did something great, which was through the occupation of land, they managed to bring a national discussion about the right of the landless people to have land. And they changed the public opinion through this action. And many people died. It was a very strong struggle. When Lula da Silva was elected, what he did, he came to the landless movement and told them, look, let's stop to have this kind of, I don't know if you know the word favela, poor housing that we have a lot here in Brazil. Lula said, look, we should not have favelas in this land occupied by the landless people. I want to improve this situation, but you have to stop occupying new land. So what Lula did was a compromise between landowners, big landowners, and the MST, a compromise where the government put money to make it better, the lands that had already been occupied, but the landless movement could not occupy new ones. So David, what happened is that new movements emerged. So in Brazil today, we have something like 100 landless movements with different names. So the main one, which is the MST, they are not playing the card of occupying new land. They are in compromise with the government. But these others are now doing this work. One of these organizations is in the Labor Federation that we are building here in Brazil. And it's a very interesting discussion. Let me tell you just something more. The majority of these landless movements, they fight for each one to have a small plot of land. You see, land reform with to make people peasants with a small plot of land. The one that we work with, they work to have a larger plot of land that belongs to all the people, a socialized plot of land, let's say. Because in perspective, we think that it's a, let's say, we are fighting to have a working class in the countryside, you see, and not small small properties that these people will always try to get more property and try to become bigger and so on. Well, I think I try to comment everything I listen here. I'm sorry if I lose something. And if you have other issues, I'm here to stay with you.
Well, look, Fabio, thanks again. I think you've answered all points of fact and some more of interpretation as well. But look, I'd like to call on Roger to give if you can, rather than just a final remark, you know, a broad response, particularly if you could, on the question of, let's say, uniting the left. We've heard of the United Front, and Fabio, you've raised the question of formations of the Fourth International of different kinds. We've all lost teeth in that unification. But you know, Roger, could you come in and you know, make some remarks maybe on that strategic side, and then Fabio, if I could, I'd ask you to make a final remark, you know, and then we've got some short reports on this and that. Roger?
Yes, thank you, Comrade. First of all, it was a real pleasure to hear Fabio's report. It's very good to meet you, Comrade. I think we seem to be in agreement on pretty well everything. And it's really encouraging. And you said you were optimistic, and that you've helped to raise our optimism still further as well by your comments. Now, one thing that Steve said in the discussion earlier is he asked, how do we create an international? Which is, of course, the crucial question for the whole of humanity. How do we do it? Well, we do it by discussions like this, by learning from one another's struggles, by organizing solidarity, by drawing the lessons together, by making sure that the sacrifices and struggles and defeats of the past have not been in vain, that we can make sure that we can avoid blunders and mistakes and gather our forces in order to bring our struggles to victory. By the way, I'd just say in passing, it's a small meeting here today, but I'd just like Fabio to know that there were comrades here from 12 countries. And I think that that's something we're very proud of in WIN, that although our meetings are small, nevertheless, we're talking to people who are involved in key struggles in countries around the world, in actually on 4 continents. So above all, of course, we need to organize solidarity, but we need, as I say, to learn the lessons of past struggles. And when we look at Latin America, it is so rich in lessons for all of us. There's a kind of synchronicity in the history of Latin America. If you look in the last, well, more than half a century, 70 or 80 years, you can see how there seems to be a kind of harmony of the struggle, its upsurges and defeats. I know that you know, that it was quite clear that in the late 60s and early 70s there was a conscious conspiracy by American imperialism to impose especially brutal, especially violent, especially monstrous military regimes around the world. It started with the coup in Brazil in the early 70s, but it spread very quickly from Brazil. It then came, sorry, in the 60s. Brazil was in the 60s, and then the bloodbath in Indonesia in the late 60s, and then of course we came to the 70s, and we had the horrific defeat of the working class in Chile in 1973. Which was followed almost immediately, like dominoes, through the whole subcontinent. The military regimes after Chile and Uruguay and Argentina and so on, with really with the ground littered with the corpses of thousands, tens of thousands of heroic fighters. And today also there's a new kind of it's a new synchronicity, a resurgence that we're seeing all over Latin America. Not only Latin America, by the way, but a worldwide, we discussed it in so many of our meetings, week after week, really, but this worldwide uprising, which has stretched, the countries of Asia, countries of Africa, some countries in Europe, and perhaps above all in Latin America, where nearly all the countries of Latin America have seen mass movements on the streets, and new hope and new defiance on the part of the oppressed classes. But we have to learn the lessons again, and Chile especially, the lessons of 1970 to 73. It really, if there was one study that needed to be made by revolutionaries worldwide, it's in those struggles. We saw what the potential was, what the possibility of revolution, and also the fatal blunders, not necessarily deliberate defeats or deliberate betrayals like we've seen, but the incredible blunders that were made, which led to this bloodbath. I remember going through the monitoring, if you like, the events of what was happening in Chile between 70 and 73. And I must say, talking about blunders, I remember a conversation I had with a young refugee from Chile whose father was actually a leading politician in the Socialist Party, in Allende's party. And this was just after the coup. And I was commiserating with him on the terrible defeat. And he said, "What defeat? It's no defeat at all. The struggle continues. We're going on. Now we're fighting a guerrilla struggle." Just a refusal to accept, a refusal to understand, even after, if you think the lesson should be clear enough, with the with the blood running through the stadiums, if you like, it should have been clear enough, with the fact that he was in fact forced to seek asylum in Britain and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, I mean, the point is that the workers on the ground understood. They had an absolutely clear and crystal clear understanding of what policies were needed by the end, at least by on the eve of the coup, at least. You had workers were marching through the streets demanding to be armed. And they were faced with sneering comments like from Allende. I know Allende was, was not a deliberate traitor, but he made fatal criminal mistakes nevertheless. And when he was faced with the demand to be given arms, we need solidarity, we need mobilization, we need a proper militia. And he was saying, well, what use is that against the tanks? And at the same time, the people in charge of the tanks, Allende actually appointed Pinochet, believing his, he was a gentleman and he wouldn't be, he wouldn't betray the trust that had been given and so on. The sailors mutinied in Valparaiso. The sailors in the naval port mutinied, and they were arrested and locked up and jailed before the coup. And Allende and the government lifted not a finger. And what was the mistake? The fact is that Allende had signed fatal promises, fatal concessions to the ruling class at the time when he was elected in 1970. He was faced with a demand that he has to promise to keep his hands off the press and the judiciary and the military, that nothing should be done to interfere with that. And once he'd made those concessions, then the ruling class were quite content to let him, you nationalize this or whatever it is, because we've got the power in our hands. We control the propaganda, we control the laws, and we control, above all, we control the army and the planes and the bombs and the tanks. And therefore, the power remains in our hands. And so, those are the lessons we need to learn. It's a lesson for all of us now, and for, no doubt we'll have many more discussions, in relation to all the struggles and eruptions and outbreaks that take place around the world. But it is a source of huge confidence and optimism that once again the masses are on the streets. 1 million in Colombia, I believe. 3 million in total in Chile. Absolutely amazing. And Brazil, we can see really courageous resistance to the Bolsonaro regime, and it's obviously its days are numbered. But the question for us then is, what now? Are we going to repeat those mistakes again? Are we going to see, are we going to see Lula once again waste the opportunities and the power that has been placed in his hands? And the same with all the rest. So look, I'm sure we'll continue these discussions. As I say, Fabio, it's an absolute pleasure to us to be in contact with you, and no doubt we'll have plenty of opportunity to continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Fabio, just one point, or just keep in mind if you could respond, maybe you won't have a chance. You know, one of the worst features that we're having in South Africa, and also I noticed in Brazil, is the utter corruption of the state-owned enterprises. And they then donate the money to the political parties. So the political parties we see are phantoms. They all structured. I didn't realize that the PT got and other parties are all funded through these state-owned enterprises. So they're not really voluntary organizations. They're not really parties. They're semi-state formations. Anyway, just sometime maybe we'll discuss a bit more on that further, because it doesn't seem that there's any reform yet. So that people then build parties on the base of $5 each or something like that, you've got millions. But no, they rather accept from the state bureaucrats. So they become creatures of the state and of capitalism, of course. But sorry, just a point. Now I'd like to bring Steve. I can see your hand still raised. You can come in, but I'd like to recognize Simon. Would you like to come in now?
Yes, thank you. I am Simon Rodriguez from Venezuela, from the International Workers Unity. First of all, thank you for the invitation to this very interesting meeting. And having listened to Fabio and agreeing on a lot of what he says, I think it's important to have these positive examples of advancement of the left in the region, like the Argentinian Left Front, which for all of its limitations and of course the debates that are ongoing between the four parties that take part in it, it is I agree that it's a very positive development, and that it would be important if Trotsky's tendencies in Argentina and in Latin America, which do not take part in it, try to get involved. This doesn't mean eliminating any criticism, but I think that it's better to do those debates within a framework of engagement rather than from the outside, because the opportunity is there. In 2020, there was a Latin American conference called by the Left Front of Argentina, but it dozens of Latin American leftist parties participated in this event, and I think it is certainly an interesting opportunity that should not be, because of sectarianism, you know, be considered unimportant or without future. In the same direction, I think that it would be a positive development if, for example, right now in Brazil, there is the debate. There are sectors, perhaps the majority of the Freedom and Socialist Party of Brazil, who want to go into an alliance with Lula and to go into an alliance with a party that is called Rede. But there is a sector of the Freedom and Socialist Party that is for a left front with PSTU, with other left parties. And I think this is an important debate. I think it's very important for there to be a strong pole of class independence in Brazil, in social struggle, but also in the electoral upcoming confrontation, which will be important. Sometimes I think that in the US, in Europe, the so-called anti-imperialist character that is perceived on governments such as Lula or Kirchnerismo in Argentina is really distorted, and it's not close to reality. This week we have seen massive strikes in Haiti, and Haiti is very important because we remember what happened from 2004 to 2017. Haiti was occupied by UN troops at the service of imperialism, but really the governments that supplied the troops were the governments of Lula, of Kirchner, the so-called progressive governments of the pink tide, and they played into this policy of military occupation, which is really an aberration, the worst thing that could be imagined. They were there for 14 years, and the crisis that Haiti is right now in is a consequence of this military occupation at the service of imperialism, using this as proxy, this so-called progressive government. I think from an international point of view, any expression of support for striking workers in Haiti would be very, very important. They are demanding that the minimum wage be raised from around $5 a day to $15 a day, and this should have all the sympathy and the open support of the left worldwide. There was also a general strike in Puerto Rico, which has been very hard hit by the austerity of the colonial regime, and I think that also there should be public instances of support for the Puerto Rican working class. Those were my comments, and thank you very much.
Simon, that's marvelous. Steve, we're approaching the end of time, and we'd like Fabio to make a final statement, if not a full sum up. Do you want to come in again?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I did leave out is the question of imperialism and fascism, the rise of fascism, because the decline of U.S. imperialism and the disarray, the internecine warfare and the imperialists are creating the rise, the dangerous conditions of a rise of fascism. And we have to take that very seriously, because a coup in the United States, a fascist coup or a takeover by these forces would lead to very dangerous situations for the working class, not only in the United States, but internationally. Internationally, every country of the world. And I think we have to seriously look at that. What would a dictatorship in the United States mean? I don't think the left is even seriously considering that. And the Trotskyists are not considering that. I think that there's a failure to understand the seriousness of that situation in the United States. And what does it mean? I mean, I think that the rise of fascism, first of all, is a organized attack on the working class, crushing of the unions. And the AFL-CIO, who were fighting here, the leadership, it's a pro-imperialist, pro-capitalist union organization. And the fight against the AFL-CIO taking $75 million a year from the US government for intervention in Venezuela, for intervention around the world with US policies. And we're going to be having a rally at the AFL-CIO protest on April the 9th on what has the AFL-CIO done around the world? How have they intervened against the working class around the world? This is an international issue. It's not a US issue, because the role of US imperialism has been to subjugate the workers of the world to multinationals, to economic policies of US imperialism. So that raised the question of a united front which against fascism and the lessons of Germany. And I think we in the working class and left revolutionary movement have to think about how to build a global united front, a world united front against fascism, uniting the working class against the dangers of fascism. And again, I don't think there's at all a seriousness of revolutionary left in the world to confront this issue. And it has to, because it is a real issue. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Steve. Look, Fabio, I think, would you like to make some further points?
Can I just ask Fabio a very quick question, as long as he's going to be speaking? I think that Lula clearly is a traitor to the working class. And when he gave himself up to be imprisoned, my thought was, well, why doesn't he call a general strike? And I was wondering what Conlutas did during that period when they arrested Lula. What was Conlutas' suggestion to the working class in a way to protect Lula against the authorities? And he obviously opened the door for Bolsonaro to run as president. And I was wondering what your organization did concretely.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Carol. Well, look, Fabio, you've got a full notebook again. We do realize that we will have further discussions, but if you would like to come back on some of these points, and then we'll have a few announcements and draw the discussion to a close.
Let me talk a bit about Brazil. Look, here in Brazil, we had the experience with Lula administration. It's a very important experience that we must draw lessons from. Lula administration was a completely bourgeois administration. It benefited from a moment when the world economy was expanding, because the economy expands and contracts, expands and contracts. In the expansion, Lula was elected. And so what happened? It was possible to give some concessions, modest concessions for the working class. So for instance, he's famous for creating a program for the very, very poor called family allowance. The family allowance is something like $40 for one family. You see, so it's a tiny concession. Of course, it's important for the family that has nothing. They get $4, but they cannot survive on that. It's a tiny concession for maybe 12 million families in Brazil. Now Bolsonaro is proposing himself to give something around 80 US dollars. He changed the name from family allowance to another name. You see, but this is a tiny concession. The minimum wage increased during Lula administration a bit. It increased, good, but it was very, very far from being a minimum wage that the labor movement has always fought for. And there are some things very problematic. I'll give an example. David raised the issue of racism in Cuba. Brazil, there is a lot of racism. I don't know if you know, but half of the Brazilians are Afro-Brazilians. And here was the last country in the world to abolish slavery. And so there is a strong racism in Brazil, unfortunately. And what Lula did, he did some things, for instance, affirmative action to get into public universities. That's good. The movement, the Black movement demanded that, Lula met the demand. Okay. There is the recognition of the lands of the former slaves, enslaved people, you see. He also makes some movements, limited, but he made. But at the same time, he, under the pressure of the US, he put out a law against drugs that tripled the incarceration of people in Brazil. 70% of these people are Black. You see, so mass incarceration in Brazil during Lula increased 3 times. I'll give another example. Here in Brazil, every year, something between 50 to 60,000 people are killed. You see, 10% by the police. During Lula, it did not change anything, nothing. There wasn't even one measure, nothing to go against that. So it's what I can tell you is that Lula administration, it was a bourgeois administration. The bourgeoisie made a lot of money, The working class, when the economy was expanding, they get some small concessions, but when the contraction came, it was in Dilma da Silva administration. Because what happened, Lula, when you had the Great Recession in the US, Brazilian economy was, how can I say, supported by the expansion of the Chinese economy. And so Brazil, the recession was not so strong as in the US and other places in the world. But then during Dilma, things got very bad. recession, high inflation, high unemployment, everything together. Dilma da Silva is a workers' party, okay? He's the one that was elected after Lula was the president for 8 years. And so when facing this reality, the decisions of Dilma da Silva, Dilma Rousseff administration were all against the working class, to cut the budget of education, healthcare, everything we know, austerity policies, you see. So that this administration is a bourgeois administration. And because of these policies that particularly Dilma Rousseff played, the working class get away from them. And at the same time, there was a lot of denouncing of corruption in Lula administration. And probably 9% are true. See, it was a lot of corruption schemes in state-owned companies, but together with the right-wing parties, they were together doing everything, see? So what happened? They started the investigation targeting mainly Lula. Okay, it was a selective investigation, a selective probing, but everything was there. And so the working class, they got away from the Workers' Party. And in the election of Bolsonaro, the working class voted against the Workers' Party. You see, at least half of the votes of Bolsonaro are not right-wing votes. They are working class votes of people that are disillusioned with the Workers' Party. So what I can tell you is that Bolsonaro is the result of the Workers' Party administration. You see, that's my understanding. When Lula was put in jail, what happened? We did not support putting him in jail or putting him free. And I tell you why, because there was a lot of denouncings that should be investigated. And probably, as I told you, the majority of them are true. So what should we do? You see, it's a bourgeois government. He is the most important leader that comes from the working class, but in government, he ruled with the bourgeoisie. Why should the working class support them? And why we revolutionaries should support him? So we did not support, but we did not support the way that the trials were conducted. So our demand was to have a fair trial, because the trial was not fair, period, nothing more. Lula managed to do something magic, which is to convince the majority of the left-wing people in Brazil that there was a coup d'etat in Brazil against Dilma Rousseff. That's not true. There was no coup d'etat. It was normal bourgeois politics. You see, parliament can impeach the president, and she was impeached. We did not support impeachment because you take her, you put the vice president, that you do not change anything. So we did not support the movement to impeach Dilma Rousseff. But what we were raising was out with Dilma, her deputy, which was Michel Temer, and all of them. That was the demand we were raising. So that's it. But now what's happened? Bolsonaro administration is very bad administration. You see, not only he wants to bring back the dictatorship, but the situation of the working class, the economy, everything is very bad. Unemployment is high. So things are very difficult in Brazil today. Poverty is spread. So the working people is going against Bolsonaro, you see? And who is the best one placed to defeat Bolsonaro in the elections? Lula. And so today Lula has something of 40% support in the polls for the elections that will be held in October. our perspective is to put together the revolutionary left, not to support Lula, but to build an independent alternative. That's what we are trying to build. So we are together, in this case, not the Labor Federation, okay? In this case, the political party, the PSTU. We are together with other organizations and individuals building an alternative, okay, to Lula, and an alternative mainly to take the struggles ahead. So that's what we are doing now in Brazil. Well, I think I spoke a lot. David, should I move to the last remarks? One last remark? Or
I think so. We're running a little over time now. Just if you could just sum up a statement or so.
Okay, look, first, I'm pleased to be here with you. I loved the discussion, and I was very well surprised to see that we are on the same page in many critical issues. So I'm happy to be here with you. Let me tell you something. We are trying to build an international campaign for these political prisoners in Cuba, and that's difficult because the majority of the left don't support it. I don't know how you work, but maybe if you want to discuss and see how we can work together to build this campaign, we would be very happy to do it. I know that you are standing in solidarity with the Clover strike in South Africa. That's very important. It's a beautiful and powerful strike that that fights back not only the ANC regime, but also the Zionists. We are supporting the strike as well, a great strike. So if this issue of Cuba or any other issues that we can collaborate, we would be happy to do that with all of you. Okay, so thank you for having me.